Historical Society. He's born and raised in Bradenton. He practiced law until he retired in 1993, and his family spent summers in Bradenton Beach. Please, we welcome you. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. I wasn't sure today I was going to make it because I've had bronchitis all weekend. I've got my cough syrup waiting there in case of emergency. I'm glad to see Henry Fuller, but I'm sorry to see him when I'm going to be speaking. When you give a talk on history, if you don't know something, you always make it up. Unless there's somebody in the audience that knows better. And I'm sure he knows better than most of the stuff that I'm talking about. Mainly I was going to talk about my recollection of summers spent at the beach. And it doesn't quite go back to the 1920s. I can't quite remember back that far, but it does go back to the early 30s. In the way of background, the beach in those days was mainly a place of retreat for the local people to go in the summer to get away from the heat. People from Bradenton and Tampa and Polk County and around the Bay Area would come out here just to get 5 or 6 degrees advantage in the temperature from the terribly hot part of the year. Tourists from further away is almost unknown. And in fact, most beach houses were not rented in the winter. If you didn't live there yourself full time, the house was closed up in the wintertime. Of course, we had some notable exceptions and some well-known winter tenants, but mostly it was a summer crowd. And got to remember, these were days before air conditioning, also days before mosquito control, and so you're pretty much out here fighting the elements. But you did get cooler. You had a nice swim twice a day. It's amazing to me as I think back on it how much more conscious we were of the sun then than people are now. You know, we could go out on the beach till about 10:30 or so, and then you had to go back inside and stay till about 3 or 3:30 till you could go back out. And of course, as I got older and more foolish, I would go out and stay most of the day. Spend the rest of my life worrying about skin cancer. But anyway, you know, I think people were more acclimated to nature and what was going on, and how to deal with it. Back in the 30s, we had one little wooden bridge over the island from Cortez. It was spectacular, I think, because of the narrow width and the amount of noise it made. It clattered and banged around, and you didn't know whether it was going to hold together or not. And when you came to another car, it was always a challenge to try to get over enough. What was even more challenging was to be fishing on the bridge, and 2 cars were going to pass. There was a little 6x6 bump rail at the bottom, and you had to stand up on that and hold your gun in and let the cars get by. That's how narrow it was. Of course, later the state built some little walk-arounds out there you could fish from, but that came along much later. There were 2 towns on the island, Bradenton Beach and Anna Maria. Nothing in between except a very few scattered cottages. You could literally go for a half mile in any direction and not see another house. And the ride from Bradenton Beach up to Anna Maria was literally a ride through the country. A little high ground, blacktop road, nothing along there. Palmettos, probably a lot of rattlesnakes, wild animals. I found some papers a while back that indicated to me very strongly that we used to have wild deer on the island. A man gave me a statement that was used in a real estate matter about the deer coming to their house early in the morning and eating their garden, and how they'd have to get up and run the deer along. I don't think we have any more here now. We also out here had Longboat Key, but that was another country as far as we were concerned. After 1932, there was no way to get to Longboat Key. And until the new bridge was built in 1958. Some people always want to know, what about that second bridge that was started in 1940 or 41? Well, that was an interesting venture by a bunch of hustlers that came into town. They sold bonds and were going to build a toll bridge to connect the two islands. And they sold a lot of bonds, and they did, thank you, they did pour an abutment, which is still, you can see that over on Longboat Key still. It's over the right-hand side of the bridge as you go on the Longboat Key. But that's as far as they ever got. The earliest memory of the island has to be on the 4th of July, 1931. And I can place that because we always went on a family picnic on the 4th of July. And the bridge washed away in March of 1932, which would have meant we were there on the 4th of July, 1931. And I do remember the bridge and being there for the picnic. And the reason I mainly remember it is first of all, the bridge was kind of small and down close to the water. And secondly, the whole abutment down there at the end of the island was covered with wrecked cars that were dumped there to stop the beach erosion, which even then was a problem. But the kids loved to play hide and seek in the old cars. And it was a fun day. As I say, the bridge washed away in March of 1932, and I don't have any knowledge of it, but I've read an article or two in the Islander and other places about what happened. It wasn't a storm, it was just a high tide that went on for 2 or 3 days. It finally got high enough that it just lifted the bridge off the pilings and floated it back into the bay, where it stayed on one of the islands back there for a while, and the county came and salvaged it, took it into Sneed Island where they used it to build a bridge from Palmetto over to Sneed Island. The reason was there were a lot more people on Sneed Island than there were on Longboat Key, if you can believe that. Anyway, one of my clients who is since deceased, Freeman Horton, told me that he was in the last car to cross the bridge before it washed out to sea. He had been over on Longboat Key at the behest of some clients of his, looking at some property that was in the process of going underwater because it was a phenomenally high tide. And he came back across the bridge. As he said, the water was lapping at the underside of the bridge, and within an hour or two it had lifted the bridge off the piling and floated it back into the bay. The tide that night is supposed to have gotten as high as the intersection of Cortez Road and Palmasol Boulevard, and that would not surprise me if it did. I remember my dad told me in the 1922 hurricane that the tide was all the way up to where Cortez Plaza is now. So it would not be unusual to think of the tide up to Palmasol Boulevard. A lot of people are going to think it's unusual. They're living there now. The next time the tide gets up that high, which it undoubtedly will. So what was it like on Anna Maria Island in 1931 and the years after that? Our house was in Bradenton Beach, north of Bridge Street. The house is still there. It was one of 2 cottages called the Curry Cottages. And the bigger of the 2 cottages was 2 stories. And in recent years it's been called the Haunted House and various things like that. And it's been remodeled now to the point that you can't tell what it was, but it was a charming old Florida house, 2 stories up on piling, with big screen porches on each side of it, on the Gulf side and the Bay side. We used the area under the house for parking cars and for the kids playing, for keeping the fishing tackle and stuff like that. The house was built so as to have a ventilation from any direction, but most of the ventilation came from east to west and west to east. That's where the predominant breezes were and are. The house had ceiling fans in every room. In the bedrooms, we also had the great big black fans that would circulate around, keep the air stirred. The first few years we stayed there were no windows in the house. We did have screens, but we had great big huge wooden shutters that were raised on a pulley on the outside and then lowered in case of bad weather and during the winter, of course. The bugs were kept out by painting the screens regularly with a mixture of crankcase oil and citronella, which would scare off the bugs and the people. The bugs were ferocious though, and we did usually have to turn out the lights at night as soon as it got dark. We could sit around though and listen to the radio. No TV, of course. No air conditioning. But the houses were well ventilated. I remember my first cousin Bobby and I had a big bedroom on the second floor, which had ventilation on 3 sides. My parents were on the other side of the hall and had a similar room. And then downstairs, all of the bedrooms ran through from west to east, all the way through the house, from one side to the other. Big swing on each end of the screen porch that would seat 3 or 4 people comfortably. And the big rocking chairs, like you've seen on the porch of a lot of old houses, had those all over the porch. The back porch, remember one thing we had hanging in the back porch screen window was a sign to tell the iceman how much ice to deliver the next day he came. And that was very important. We didn't have an electric refrigerator. We had an ice box. And one thing I remember about the ice box is a big old block of ice sitting in the top compartment. After my Uncle Whitman had been out fishing, we'd clean the fish and wrap it in the daily mullet wrapper. And you lay it up there on the block of ice and it would soon melt down a form just like the fish itself was, to keep it even colder. We had a half bath on each floor, and then down on the ground level there was a half bath as well as a men's and a women's dressing room with a shower in it. We also on the ground floor had a maid's room, and many people from town did bring their maids out here to stay with them at the beach. An interesting phenomenon, which is not be politically correct now, is that around 5 o'clock every afternoon you'd see all the maids go out on the beach and meet with each other and then go swimming. And then in a little bit they'd come back in and start getting ready for supper. But our maid got in such a state of shock one time, I remember, that I had a terrible time getting her back out here after that. She's screaming down there in her room in the middle of one night about Jesus save me and oh God, I'm coming and a few things like that. We went down there and there was a couple of these great big old grampuses fighting with each other on the edge of her bed. And I'm sure that was a terrible fright. It would be to anybody. Coming out here from town, of course, we went out Manatee Avenue until we got to Palmasol Park. And then you would turn through Palmasol Park and go around Palmasol Boulevard until you got to Cortez Road. Incidentally, Manatee Avenue was a little 2-lane high crown road. Palmasol Boulevard was 2-lane, but even worse. And Cortez Road was about as bad. You know, if you saw another car coming, you had to sort of ease over to the edge and let them get by. Then you had the challenge of the bridge, getting over it. If there was a car coming the other way, you couldn't go over the draw span. You had to wait until the traffic cleared, and then you'd go through them in your direction. The beach itself was much more broad than it is now. It was, I would guess from our house out to the water was at least 300 feet. And one reason I remember is because one of the first things that we did every summer, and many of the other families did too, we had the framework permanently built out on the beach for a thatched hut. And the kids would all be sent across the street to the bay side where we would cut palm fronds and bring them back over the beach side where we would help the men thread the palm fronds into the top of the frame to make a shelter that would give you some shade about halfway down to the beach from the house. And those were kept there during the summer, and then during the winter they would blow away or disintegrate somehow or other, and you'd rebuild it again on the same frame the next year. Also gave the kids a great place to play during the middle of the day. And you could dash out under it and get in the water and then dash back in and cool off. Right out in front of our house, we had a wonderful patch of rocks. They were in about, I'd say 3.5 or 4 feet of water out to 7 or 8 feet of water. It was a huge expanse of lime rock on the bottom out there. And there were various holes and caves and stuff like that in the rocks. And that was our, of course, most convenient fishing spot. We would go out there and fish for sheephead and grunts and those little rock bottom fish. And, always get fish whenever you went. One of the best things about fishing, of course, was going to get the bait. And that was always fiddlers. And we got fiddlers over on the bayside right across from the house. Or we went over to where the bridge is now, and there's always fiddlers over there. And what you do is you put a couple of 1x4s down on the beach with a little opening in between, and then the kids would run around the beach and herd all the fiddlers into the little opening, and then somebody would stand at the opening with a big can and scoop them up. Then when we got over to the house, everybody that fished had a little regular tomato can about this big with a wire on it that went around your neck, and you'd fill that up with fiddlers and it'd hang on your chest, and then you'd wade out to the rocks with your cane pole and fish. Everybody had a crocus sack tied around their waist to put the fish in, and whenever you had a load of fish, you'd go in and dump them in the wash tub. Anyway, we'd always get a load of fish. No problems getting fresh fish every day. The cane poles we used in front of the house were the native local cane, cut out of your yard, not at the beach mostly, but in town. Whereas if we went down to the Anna Maria Pier to fish, we used Calcutta cane poles, which are much longer and stronger and could really reach out there to go after some mackerel or something. We did a lot of beach combing, mostly just for driftwood and stuff that floated in. And we also, if we behaved as kids, we got to walk down to town every day or so, town being Braden Beach. And the grocery store down there, I remember, had slot machines in it. And one of the great challenges was to get a penny or a nickel or something. There were penny and nickel slot machines. I'm not sure they had a dime one, but if they did, nobody had a dime anyhow. But we get to go down there and play the slot machines. We also did a lot of visiting with neighbors. We knew where all our friends were staying. People, incidentally, did not stay at addresses. They stayed at houses with names. The houses all had names, like the Curry Cottages or the Fortune Cottage or whatever else. Remember one down in Braden Beach? A lot of people used was called the Ark. It was right out on the beach, and it was a big old 2-story house. Anyway, we would visit our neighbors during the day. Nighttime was more challenging. I mentioned sitting around listening to the radio. We actually did, as a family, sat around and listened to the radio. Also listened to a lot of the programs in the afternoon, like Sky King or Orphan Annie or some of those things. Also, both in the daytime and at nights, we played cards all the time. Sometimes the children got dragooned into a bridge game, so you had to learn some basic bridge hands and bidding and so forth. But the kids also played with themselves. We played all sorts of rummy games, poker games, double solitaire, all sorts of card games. And we played board games frequently. The only one I can remember for sure is Parcheesi. We played Parcheesi damn near every day. I'm not sure we had the Monopoly yet, but whenever that came along, we also had Monopoly. We walked on the beach as a family or as a group almost every night. After supper and whenever the kitchen was cleaned up, everybody would come out of their houses all up and down the beach and walk up and down the beach. Many nights we went crabbing for blue crabs. We always had a couple of gasoline lanterns and crab nets and a big wash tub to pull along in the surf behind you. And then on nights you got blue crabs, you had to go back to the house and boil them and pick them, which as the summer wore on became more of a chore. And it was fun, but no problems going out and getting a mess of blue crabs anytime you wanted them. We also went gigging in the Gulf quite a bit and in the Bay. And then as I got older and right after the war, we would go over to Passage Key and go gigging. It was fantastic gigging over there. During the war, Passage Key had been used as a bombing range, and the bottom out there was littered with bomb casings. And the fish and crabs and conchs and everything loved that bottom, and you could go out there and either wade or stay in your shallow draft boat, and you know, you could fill the boat up with fish if you wanted to. Always had to look out for stingrays. We also had a varied menu of fresh fish and sea life of various sorts. Every now and then we tried to cook a stingray. And even though some people say it tastes like a scallop, it doesn't. It tastes like a stingray. One of my favorite trips was to go mullet snitching in Longboat Pass. My Uncle Whitney Curry, was a great fisherman and would go to any lengths to get one up on the fish. And what he did was he had a little about 14-foot inboard motorboat we kept on the bay side of our beach house, and he would get a couple of planks, probably about 10 feet wide and 1 inch deep, and 10 inches, 8 or 10 inches wide, and he would tow a couple of those things down the Longboat Pass, and we would nail them up on the piling that were down there in the middle of the pass where the bridge had washed away. And then you'd get out and stand on that narrow walkway with your Calcutta pole and your snitch hook and just wait till you saw a school of mullet coming through. And you can see them, you know, in 8 or 10 feet of water. And whenever they would come through, you'd start pulling that snitch hook up till you got a load of fresh mullet. I remember one time one of these 300 or 400 pound jewfish came through while we were out there snitching, and I wanted to snitch it. He practically had to tie me up and put me in the bottom of the boat to keep me from snitching that thing. It would have taken you way out to sea. The snitch poles were really works of art. They were long, big, round Calcutta poles, probably 12 feet long. And the line was fastened to the pole with a big metal swivel, and then you had about 6 or 8 feet of heavy cord, like they put on crab traps and things, and then you'd have about 8 or 10 feet of leader, and at the bottom of the leader you'd have one of these big 3-pronged snitch hooks, which I'm sure must be against the law now. But you could drop that thing down there and just let it lie on the bottom nice and still, and the mullet soon enough would start coming around there again. And when you thought your area was covered with fish, you'd give it a big snitch. You'd usually get one, sometimes you wouldn't, and every now and then you get 2. Anyway, that was part of our what went on the table. A lot of people use cast net, but we never did. We always used snitch hooks. Some of the other things we did to harvest the sea was to get scallops, and that was no big deal. We usually went over here to the boatyard and would dog paddle across the little dredge channel there and out to the sandbar, and then you'd walk around with your tub and get a bunch of scallops. Didn't take too awful long. Bring them back home, and then you dump crushed ice in on the scallops, and soon enough they'd all pop open, and then you'd go in there with your knife and get the little piece of meat out. Scalloped a lot of places, but that was the only one at a walking distance. Another good scalloping place was where the Manatee Avenue Bridge comes across the bay now. Over on the mainland side, there was a just huge bed of scallops that lived there all the time, I suppose, and it finally got fished out, of course. We'd go down to the Anaria Pier fishing, but not too often, maybe once every 10 days or 2 weeks. And down there you'd fish with little silver minnows just like they do now. And that was also on a lighter weight Calcutta pole, and fishing usually for mackerel, which was the fish that most people got down there. We'd also go over and fish on the bridge going into town, but that was usually with the snitch hooks too. You could stand there on that little 6-inch piece of wood and hope you didn't get hit in the rear end, and throw your hook back under the bridge. And you could tell when the fish were starting to mill around again and everything, and pull it up there and get. I never got anything but a mullet. I understand they outlawed the hooks because people used them to get snook and other things like that with them. It was a great fishing machine. One of the trips that I remember that I didn't go on, my dad was a prominent lawyer in the community and was also the prosecuting attorney for many years and the state senator from this district. And my Uncle Whit, we were all very close as one big family. He was the former mayor of Braidman and a very successful real estate developer. And at least once a year in the summer, they would go out in the bay on their annual fishing trip together. My dad didn't care a thing in the world about fishing, but he felt like he had to go with Uncle Whit at least once a year. So they looked like a couple of bums when they went out into the bay in their fishing clothes, you know, a regular dress shirt down to your hand, and a big straw hat, and collar buttoned up, well guarded against the sun. One day they were out there, and this was before the Intercoastal Waterway was dug. Some nice yacht went through there behind them and ran aground, and the guy in it was gunning it back and forth and rocking it. And he finally hollered for them to come over. So as I said in my story, the senator and the mayor paddled over there to this big yacht. And the guy in it asked him to take him over to the mainland or to the Braidman Beach so he could phone for help. And they did. They rowed him over there. Anyway, when he crawled up out of the boat and looked back down the boat, my dad said he threw him a 50-cent piece. Says, "Here, you boys, go get yourselves a beer while I phone." I can't remember any very dramatic storms or hurricanes when we stayed on the island. It may have something to do with the time of the year, I don't know. But I know one of my other uncles stayed in the two houses one time when a hurricane did come through. I remember him telling us about, see, all the houses were up on pylon. And he sat there on the stairs about halfway up and watched the waves break under the house as it just rolled all the way over the island. And of course the houses weren't damaged. Those down on the ground were damaged just like they are now. But the ones up on pilings withstood the storms very well. I remember a little bit about Longboat Key, even though it was very difficult to get over there. When I got up to junior high and high school age, we loved to go over to the old Ringling Hotel, particularly at night, chase each other around and have a big time there. Somebody finally fell down an elevator shaft and got killed. And they closed it up and fenced it off. I also remember the shark fishing industry. When you would go down to the pass, which I frequently walked down there and just to fish in the pass, late in the day you would see an inboard motorboat, looked like it was 5 feet long, coming in from the Gulf, and they would have sharks tied all up and down the sides of the boat and being towed behind the boat too. Well, they had been out to the trot lines, which they set 5 or 6 miles offshore 2 or 3 times a week, and they would catch a whole trot line full of sharks and then go get them and tow them in. I think most of them were towed into the Savarese Fish Company property near the north end of Longboat Key, but there, from time to time, there was also a shark fishery on Leffis Key, which is now the county environmental park down there. And they would pull the sharks in there and butcher them for their fins and for their livers and for their hide. And I don't think they caught them for meat. People didn't eat shark meat those days. There was also a little airstrip on Longboat Key. It was built there during the early years of World War II. It was an emergency landing field for the main airport over there where the Braden and Sarasota Airport is now. I do remember, though, as a child, that airplanes landed on the beach in Anna Maria occasionally for gas. Or they may have been lost, I don't know, but I do remember the big biplanes could land on the beach and get gas and then take off again. Of course, I remember when the molasses barge washed ashore. It happened, I think, in the winter, but from then on in the summer, we always could swim out to it and climb up on it and have a lot of fun around there. One of the stories about during the war was, you know, we had a Coast Guard patrol on the beach during the war. And we never knew whether to keep people from landing or keep people from leaving or what. But they had a couple of Coast Guardsmen that would patrol up and down the beach. I remember one night they came to our house and knocked on the door and said there was something in the window that had to come out. It looked like a signal being sent out to sea. We went around and looked out the window, and my mother had washed her girdle and hung it in the window. Also, you couldn't have any lights on at night on the Gulf side because it would silhouette any ships that were going down the coast. We usually had the lights off anyhow. Anyway, those were great times that I remember growing up on the island. Times that we won't ever see again, but that's life. Nothing we can do about that. And it's great that the Historical Society is doing what it can to perpetuate those memories. Speaking of which, and going through all my junk, I found a few pictures I want to give you all. One is of Longboat Pass in 1937, and the other, John Dean probably remembers, that's the opening day at the Island Bank, 1960. And I found a few other snapshots. One is of one of the artesian wells that was in Longboat Pass. After Westview washed away and the houses that were down there on the south end of the island, there were 2 or 3 artesian wells that stuck up out of the Gulf or out of the pass and continued to flow there for many, many years. And this is one of them, and you can see the water flowing out of it. This is a picture I took by the well looking back toward Braden Beach and Anna Maria, and you can see there's not a sign of a house or a person or anything else. And the other is one of my favorites from back when I was in high school. There was a little ice cream and sandwich store in Braden Beach called Hannah's Fountain Service. Some of you may remember Hannah's Fountain Service. I took a picture of it because it had a sign on the front that says, seats 5,000 people, 6 at a time. If y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Are there any questions?
What was on the maid's bed?
Well, we call it grampus. Looks like a scorpion you'd see in the desert.
Oh, okay.
It's a big old bug, you know, it's that long, and it runs on 8 legs, and it's got a big tail that comes up, it has a stinger on the end of it. We still have them out here. We have a house out here on Tuna Street, and anytime I'm cleaning up the yard on the Gulf side, I usually turn up 1 or 2 of them. But you don't mess with them if you see one. Anything else?
Was the Gulf Park built at the time you were out here?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was here long before I was. Henry Fuller probably remembers when that was built. The Gulf Park Hotel in Ilingshurst?
Where, on Anna Maria?
Yeah, down in Ilingshurst, Braden Beach.
Let me say that I'm so far behind that, there wasn't a big hotel over here as far as I know when I was here. And between the bathhouse, which is just across the, we call it Anna Maria, but the girl wasn't Spanish, it was a Dutch, I think it was named for. Mariah.
And Mariah.
Mariah.
I've given up that battle.
The cluster of small houses there around the bathhouse. Then you could walk all the way down to the bathhouse, which was across from Cortez, and there weren't any houses.
You know,
Now, if there's a hotel out here, I didn't know it.
well, it was built somewhere probably around 1910 or 15 or something like
Around
that.
1910? And where was it built?
Well, it would have been on the north end of Bradenton Beach. On the Gulf side, there was a big old 3-story wooden hotel.
About 26th Street.
You know,
Yeah, it could have been that early.
We have pictures.
That was it.
anything else? Thank you very much.
Bradenton Beach as such.
Henry will have to come tell you about the generation or two before.